Now it's time to move on to, I think, our juiciest segment, and that is Jesse Marsch, because you and I, again, Alex, have been talking about this. We've been speculating about it. I've tried to pull all the strings I could to figure out if it was indeed Jesse Marsch. So now it's great that confirmation is out there and we can actually talk about it with certainty that he's a potential candidate for this job, whether, he wants the job, which was mentioned in the article that they're unsure of whether he has interest. I think it's interesting. We're going to watch a couple clips here from Futbol Americas. So shout out to Herc and Sebi for allowing us to use this clip over here. Go check them out. Herc's got a YouTube channel as well where I took the clip from if you want to go check that out. But they talked about their opinions, and I think it's going to be really interesting to listen to because Jesse Marsch is American. He was up for that U.S. job. He talked about wanting it. He lost it out to Greg. He's starting beef with Greg a little bit right now, which I think will just lead to some top tier content here in Concacaf between Canada and the United States. But right now, just here's a little clip for us to watch and break down. We have two clips from Futbol Americas. The first one is going to be talking about Jesse Marsch and the links to Canada, whether they think it's a fit or not.
Turk, what do you think? Jesse Marsch, is he the right call for Canada? And is Canada the right call for Jesse Marsch?
Just Jesse Marsch, because we can go anywhere we want with American, but
yes,
he is the American available at this moment. Certainly with that pedigree, you'd be hard-pressed to find a better coach in probably their history with just a resume. I kind of like this if it's Jesse Marsch for many reasons. I like this in the way that Jesse Marsch and his style may be conducive for the types of athletes that are so dynamic and technically sound that the Canadian national team has on their men's side. Alphonso Davies, Kyle Larin, Jonathan David, Richie Larea, Kone in the midfield. I mean, Tejan Buchanan. There are some players that if you were to put these players in a system where they recover the ball with speed at a higher pace in front of the goal, closer to goal, this could be a very difficult team to play against. That is the upside with Jesse Marsch. The downside with Jesse Marsch is also that resume you speak of. In some of those places, this style didn't go over well. In some of those places, this type of style for a certain type of player could be a detriment to their development, a detriment to the way they go about their business. But I kind of like this. I like this for Canada. I like this for Jesse Marsch.
I kind of like it too. It's a risk, and I want to go to and exactly what they were talking about. His style is very unique. It's the reason I didn't know if this was going to work, because it's that Red Bull philosophy. We've seen it work in his career well. Salzburg's probably the best example of that. We also see him take a big step over to Leipzig, and that's the one that worries me a little bit because he was handpicked and tailor-made for the Leipzig job, considering he was at New York Red Bulls. And then he went over to Salzburg. He climbed the ladder. He knows the system. He wasn't able to make it work. He then had a couple difficult spells as well in his career. I mean, I know, talking with a couple CF Montreal fans, that they weren't the biggest fans of his time there, but we can get back to that. And of course, what he did with Leeds. So I'm curious to know what you think, Alex. I think putting in that philosophy into a national team is very difficult. On the flip side, if you can make it work, and Herc kind of talked about it, the athletes that we have and players that are great at pressing, Jonathan David, Kone, Buchanan, Davies can all press. You find a Chouanier into that lineup, all of a sudden, these maybe it leaves out a Kyle Larin, but he can press too. I think Jonathan David is excellent when it comes to pressing, and I think that these players could suit what he wants to do. But I think no matter what, no matter which way you look at it, it's a risk given the way he wants to play. Do you think it could work, or do you think Jesse Marsch would have to, some way, shape, or form, change his philosophy and his style just for the international game, or he's going to have to do that regardless?
Yeah, I think there'll definitely have to be some adapting to do, no doubt. I think you kind of saw that at Leeds, where, look, he had success in what his mission was year one, which is avoid relegation. He did that, and to his credit, he did so while playing away that not a lot of relegation candidates do, and I think that's worth commending. But also, as we saw, they had so many injuries pile up. It's not always the most sustainable way to play when you're asking your players to run so much, press high, can be physically demanding, and especially in international soccer, it's tough because with the fixture load, what it is in world football now, it feels like players are playing way too much. It can be asked a lot to ask them, like, oh yeah, you're putting in 90s every week. Guys like, I think Alistair Johnson, right? This guy's putting in for Celtic 90 on Wednesday, 90 Saturday, 90 on Wednesday, 90 Saturday to come into Canada. And you're like, oh yeah, you're going to press here too, right? Like, it's something where I wonder if that might be a bit too physically demanding, especially it's like, oh yeah, you're traveling from Glasgow all the way to a some island somewhere in the Concacaf region or somewhere for a game in Florida, California. It's not easy travel either. So I definitely think they'll have to adapt. But at the same time, I think there's I just want to kind of touch on your point, Josh, as well, about his time at Leipzig. I also feel like that circumstance too, same with that Leeds where it didn't fully fit him. The Leipzig job, it felt like he got a very short leash there. He only lasted 17 games, I think, or 19 games, I think it was. Came at a very tough time for Leipzig, just in the sense they just lost Julian Nagelsmann, one of the best managers they've had, who went, I think, at that point he'd gone to Bayern, or was about to go to Bayern. Then they lost some key guys like Dio Upamecano, Ibrahima Konate, both left for 40+ million euros. Marcel Sabitzer went to Bayern Munich for a lot of money. They ended up getting rid of some other key pieces. Huang Hee-chan, his loan ended. They had some other key pieces. It was a bit of a transition period, and I found it so surprising they sacked him as quick as they did. I get it at one sense, because you go to a club like Leipzig, it's top 4 bust, and he was struggling to start. But it is worth noting that we haven't really got a whole lot of leash of him at the top level, because Salzburg, he dominated that league, did what he needed to do, check. Leipzig, he didn't really get a full season to see what he could have done over that. Okay, Leeds, again, when you're at a relegation club, the expectations, the style, the demands are so different than, say, if he was at, I don't know, name a club in the mid-table these days. So that's something to keep an eye on. So I don't know. I feel like that's the thing with Jesse Marsch. He's both proven and unproven. And the reality is we know his style. We know how he wants to play. But there are still some question marks of how it would fit at different levels.
And I think, picking up on that point, and then we're going to move on quickly, and we're going to have a think about it, Alex, because what we're going to do now is build what we think Jesse Marsch's perfect Canada starting 11 could look like. So I just brought up the website, and I guess I already have one saved in there. So just give a quick little thought about it. I just want to touch on that point, because I do think, you're playing one side and I'm playing the other, and I think it's fair both ways. I 100% agree with you that his time at Leeds United is hard to judge, because he came in, his style of football does not meet the requirements of a relegation-based Premier League club. I'm sorry, it doesn't. You need Sean Dyche. That is the type of manager you need to avoid relegation. Doesn't work. He did keep them up, huge, a lot of love within Leeds. He always had that Ted Lasso hanging over his head, which was just when the series started coming out, they were unfairly treating him like, he didn't know what he was doing, but he saved them. Then he quickly got sacked. My biggest issue was with Leipzig, and I get what you're saying about, transition, but that's just kind of what the club Leipzig is. The amount of players that move on from Leipzig each season, it happens. And it always happens. Yeah, the managers who have done well there have always found a way to be able to lose out on players and bring players in. Openda is a perfect example of that. You see different players get shifted out and new ones coming in. And just the fact that that club was made to play his system, that he did it already at New York, he did it at Salzburg, he found success at Salzburg. And then, they have Marco Rose in right now, who's another Red Bull prodigy who kind of came back and picked up the pieces of Leipzig and is doing really well. I'm not saying he got the fairest hand that he was dealt, but given how Leipzig is expected to do, he was very much underachieving, which is why he got sacked. Maybe it was unfair. Maybe that's just the one season where all the pieces didn't work. It's just there's been a lot of proof before of a lot of turnover at that club, but managers finding success.
Well, that's why it's kind of surprising, though, because if he had the success at Red Bulls, which, he did, I think he pushed for a couple supporter shields. I don't know if he ended up winning them in the end. He had the success at Salzburg. Then why not be patient with him, right? Because if it's that's where it's also the flip side of, was it too early? I think, again, no doubt it was reasonable from Leipzig's perspective to sack him. They ended up salvaging 4th that year.
And won the Pokal, I believe.
And they won the Pokal as well. So they obviously made the right choice, no doubt. But it is something from Marsch's perspective where he's had the history of getting it done at Red Bulls and Salzburg. Of course, you could just counter it by saying, well, the jump up to Leipzig was too big of a jump for him. But again, we're just never going to know. So that's where I guess that kind of gray area is he as good as, or is he as quote unquote bad as his Leipzig stint, or is he as good as his Salzburg stint? Maybe the answer is somewhere in between, right?
And I like it. I like both points, and I'm here for the risk. I am looking at the options we've seen today. But Alex, just very, very quickly, we're not going to spend too much time on this. I just want to have a mental picture of what we think a proper Jesse Marsch team will do. So not too much discussion. We're going to go back and forth. So the system, it'll either have to be a 4-2-3-1 or a 4-4-2. That is what Jesse Marsch is known for. I'm assuming, because I know you're leaning towards the 4-2-3-1. Is that what you would prefer under Jesse Marsch in this pressing system, or you want to go true Red Bull and go with that 4-4-2 or 4-2-2-2?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say let's go for a 4-2-3-1. Or yeah, actually, we'll see, because basically I looked at his past stints at New York. He used a 4-2-3-1. At Salzburg, he used more of a 4-2-3-1. At Leipzig, he kind of I think it was a bit more of a 4-4-1-1. I think it ended up being. So there's obviously some flexibility within it. So I think what we should actually look at is more what fits Canada, because I think a 4-2-3-1 kind of could make sense off the bat. You have Eustachio Kone, who could be a double pivot, but then the question is, who's the 10? Do you trust Jonathan David to be that 10 long term? I think if you're wanting to play the pressing style that Marsch wants to play, let's be honest, that's Jonathan David's leading the line for that. He's such an incredible presser. He covers like 12 kilometers per game. Agree. But then who's the number 10? Do you feel like it's Kone? Because it could be Kone, but we haven't really seen a whole lot of him there. I wonder if maybe something like a 4-2-2-2 could also end up making a bit more sense. Although then that leads to the big question we've had of Canada: is that a bit too light in the midfield?
It's funny because the 4-2-2 is true Red Bull, but it's a lot of what we've seen from this Canada side. And there's some question marks around can Jesse Marsch adapt? Excuse me. Take it away, Alex, for 2 seconds.
Yeah, well, that's it. It's the debate of what what does he feel fits this team and what fits his style. I think we should expect some sort of back four. So I think that's something, no surprise there. I think this will be good for what this Canadian team needs. But yeah, I think the question is, I, for example, wonder if it could be a 4-1-4-1. We haven't really seen Marsch play that, but I think that's something where you have that true six. You have that four, especially if, for example, Eustachio and Kone are in that four. Eustachio can press. We've seen it for Porto. He has no problem leading the press. Maybe that's sort of the scenario where, because of the lack of a true 10, because right now the true 10 options, I mentioned Kone, but he's more of an 8 at club, although he has the skills of a 10. He played there at the youth level. Osorio's have been a 10, but we just haven't seen a whole lot of him to suggest he could be starting over some of the other names we've seen at the right now. Schwanier could play the 10, but he's still pushing to make the lineup. I do kind of like a 4-1-4-1. I don't know if you can tell me if you don't think Marsch would play that, but I think that's enough of a tweak on what he's played, but also what he has available within this Canadian team.
It's hard to know exactly what he'd do. I don't think it's out of, like, in terms of his style, a 4-1-4-1. I don't think it's it's crazy, especially if you have 2 8s that can press, like you mentioned. You have Jonathan David, one of the best options he could hope for up top. So let's just go for it right now, have a little bit of fun with it. I'm assuming, and I think no matter what, unless we go that 4-2-2, like I don't know if we want that Larin David combo, but
well, I think even then, if you're going 4-2-2, it's interesting to know who the second striker would be, because again, that's the one thing where, if we're talking about guys who are going to win and lose from Marsch getting hired, I'd be very curious to see where Kyle Larin fits under Marsch, because he is such a unique striker in the sense that his best games come when he just kind of gets to ghost around the pitch. And I don't say that in a bad way. That's Larin's strength of kind of disappearing from coverage and then popping up in the box with goals, right? He's kind of like that false 9. And in a pressing system like this, there isn't always room for a false 9. There's room for guys who are willing to press, willing to push. If you're going to 4-2-2, who's that guy do you pair alongside David? Ugbo's been pressing a lot at Sheffield Wednesday. Maybe Ugbo's the guy. Could it be Theo Bair? Motherwell pressed decently as well, and Bair's certainly got a good athletic profile for something like that. Is it something unconventional where you just off the ball, Liam Miller ends up pairing up front? He's got the speed, he's got the energy to press. That's kind of where my question is with the 4-2-2-2 is who's that second striker?
I think it's fair. I like your 4-1-4-1. I just think it's fun. I say let's go for it. That way there's no debate. It's Jonathan David up front. So Alex, back to front. Let's do this. So 4-1-4-1. We are going to go with Crepeau, Johnson, Cornelius, Miller, Davies. Am I missing one? Is that, or do you want Bombito maybe? I think that maybe makes more sense. And maybe take out Miller.
If you're wanting a bit of a high press, team that's willing to play higher, I think, as we mentioned last time we built one of these for the France friendly.
Yes,
that's Moise Bombito's music. He's fastest player in MLS this year. Can keep touting that until someone passes him. I think he definitely would fit in this sort of high press sort of system. So I guess really the question is from there, who fits alongside him most? Because Cornelius, I know at Malmö, they end up playing a lot aggressively because they're the top team in the league. They want to beat down teams in possession. So Cornelius has that comfort. So does Kamal Miller, to be fair. At Miami, remember those clips of him just making these crazy slide tackles because Miami were playing a 4 and they're essentially like, all right, in the final third, Busquets is going to push up, Alba's going to push up, Kamal, be ready to cover. So he does have some comfort in those sorts of high press systems. So maybe on paper,
Miller?
You could make an argument between Miller or Cornelius to pair alongside them.
I'd say Miller's faster. I think that helps a little bit with a higher line. I would lean. I prefer Cornelius. It just, I guess, obviously depends on the system, but I feel like Miller actually probably would fit Marsch's system a little bit better. We're going from Jesse's point of view. So do you agree? I do feel like it's probably Kamal.
Well, so I think if we're going for straight line pace, I think that's Miller. Bombito. Miller's got that good straight line pace. There have been more questions about how he handles on the turn, how he handles his agility, but there's no doubt he can jet. We've seen it sometimes. There's last year for Miami, Montreal, he's made some huge, Canada even, he's made some huge slide tackles. So I think if we're going at it from Marsch's perspective, I think that Bombito Miller back two, and I think Davies Johnson, I think that's also pretty reasonable. Although, I think that's reasonable because I do wonder, again, this is just me kind of thinking out loud, if there's a scenario where Jesse Marsch sees Alphonso Davies' speed and it's like, that's someone who can really help us press.
I mean, if all it would take is for like an Atakubi or even a Richie to go at left back and then we push Davies up, which we could do. I think the biggest question mark then right now is who will go at left mid. Assuming Buchanan sticks at right, you need someone who can press at left. Do you want to push Davies up? Do you want to try a Schaffelberg, a Liam Miller, who, like we've talked about, has had a great season? Schaffelberg is one of our favorites coming off the bench. Waterman will not be staying there at left wing. Which one would you prefer? I know Liam Miller can press. That's for sure. So can Schaff. They're both fast. They both have a ton of energy. I'm leaning a little bit more towards Liam just because I like Schaffelberg on the bench.
I think Miller's just the one where he's started enough for Canada. He's starting at a good level in the championship. Schaffelberg right now, and again, this is the asset of Schaffelberg. You can have him as a super sub, and that's an asset, right? Because some guys, you don't always know how they're going to react off the bench. So there's no problem of keeping a Schaffelberg as a super sub role and growing from there. So I'd say probably you put Miller on the left because he's got the speed. He's been playing wing back for Preston, so he's got the fitness, right? It's a lot of physical demands to be playing up and down that side. So I think that's a reasonable shout to go Miller within if you're putting Davies at left back. But then there's of course the question of could there be a scenario where Davies ends up playing a little higher up to press, of course.
Yeah, and like Armin said here, we could that could easily be an option as well. Larea, Atakubi at left back, Davies up at left wing. I think the biggest question mark maybe is now the midfield. I mean, we said Eustáquio, Kone, they're locks. Is it Chouanier? Is it Ahmed? I think those are the only two. Osorio does not fit this type of system whatsoever. I would say in terms of pressing, it's Chouanier, but
that's it, because Chouanier, for those who are unfamiliar, I think he's like something like the back-to-back reigning beep test champion in Montreal. Like every year preseason, there's just like, oh, they're doing beep test today, and then about half an hour later on Twitter, they're like, oh, yep, they're Chouanier won again. So if we're talking fitness, he's up. He'd probably be one of the choices. Of course,
Ahmed, your boy.
Ali Ahmed, no doubt as well. He's played a lot of wing back. He's played midfield. He's got the fitness. I think that one, it's honestly between those two because I think it's something where Osorio, just the legs to be pressing. You kind of see it with TFC. He ends up playing a little more deep when they're pressing, just because he doesn't have the legs to be pushing around as much up front. But I'd say those two, unless again, there's always that option where if you believe you want Eustáquio higher up the pitch, because that's one thing. Eustáquio is a very fit guy, although maybe he's not playing as much now. You could also have the scenario where it's Piet with Eustáquio and Kone in front. But I like this Eustáquio, Kone, Chouanier. I think that kind of screams a mix of quality midfield control, but then you got the just absolute stamina and physical capacity of a Chouanier.
All right, and just last little note here on the starting 11. I mean, if you really want to make it look like a 4-2-3-1, you could drop Chouanier or Kone. make it like a 4-2-3-1 there. This could also be Piet, like Alex mentioned, for a true double pivot with Kone up. You can move Davies to left mid. Left
Ahmed
wing.
on the wing too, because like you mentioned, he's been playing there for the Whitecaps. So there's that scenario.
Ahmed could go in there as well. We could have Larea or Atakubi at left back. Or if you really want to do the 4-2-2 or 4-4-2, then more than likely Chouanier would become Laren. You'd have David Laren up front, your two wide players. You stack kind of Kone in there. Or
I wonder again if there's a scenario where David Buchanan could be if you want Jesse Marsch pressing, or you put those two up front. Buchanan has played striker with Buchanan with David before. You can put either, for example, you could put Chouanier and Ahmed as the two kind of 10s kind of guys you can press and play in between. Like there's real flexibility, I think, within this group, but I think we have a kind of core idea of it's going to be Kone, Eustáquio, David, and Buchanan are going to kind of be the key pieces of Marsch ball. Guys who can run, guys who can get up the pitch, guys who can combine. Really, the bigger question marks are who ends up joining them up front, and also the back line. Because I do want to just shout out a comment that was there earlier from Irv Blitzer. Scott Kennedy is someone also to keep an eye on if we're talking pace. He is probably he's Bombito level speed, but unfortunately he's not played very much this year in Austria due to injuries. But if he gets healthy, you can very much throw him in the mix. If we're talking athletes who can get up down the field with speed, Kennedy ticks that box.
He does. It's just like you mentioned, he's not had a great season. He's not been able to really stay healthy. I would still probably rather go with the other two, but when he was fully fit and if he can get his form back, then he's definitely in the mix. But now we're going to move on to the rivalry section. This is our final clip from Futbol Americas. Seb and Herc are kind of talking about the rivalry between Berhalter and Marsch, as well as Canada and the States. So check it out.
The U.S. men's national team is an objective of Jesse Marsch, not because I think it is or you think it is, because Jesse Marsch himself has put it out there. Mm-hmm. He has put that out there. And in some way, shape, or form, he has made a nemesis out of Greg Berhalter. This would be great TV for us.
So there is kind of a previous history here. Obviously, Jesse Marsch kind of started his coaching career with Montreal. And when he was out of a job there, apparently he tried to get either an interview or a conversation with CSA. They said no, but he had a plan, apparently, like in mind for what he would do with Canada. This is, at this point, 12 years ago. So this is something that's been at least, I think, on his radar for a long time. But you mentioned the U.S. job. I think, based on kind of some of the coverage I've seen come out of Canada, there's at least some people in Canada that wouldn't want an American as their head coach, right? Rivalry, we get it. You just said it would be great for the rivalry. What about from a U.S. perspective? If he takes the Canada job, does that hurt his future U.S. candidacy?
No. I mean, history has shown us it wouldn't.
You don't think U.S. fans would raise an eyebrow and would say... What if Jesse Marsch beats the U.S.? Like, what if he does what Berhalter did to Mexico?
I think that increases his opportunity of actually getting the job as to where Jesse Marsch is today. I think Jesse Marsch having the Canadian national team job would only help his chances. Could only help his chances. I don't see Jesse being in the picture today. I think some fans have lost interest in a Jesse Marsch because of the leads, because of how that
U.S.
went.
fans, you're saying, far as like a national team manager.
As far as a national team manager, whereas you can only increase your stock if you do well against the U.S. men's national team, if you do well in Copa America as the Canadian national team coach, against the likes of Argentina, against the likes of Peru, against Chile, et cetera, et cetera. If you do well in that setup and make a run, that's when fans are going to say, this could have been for the U.S. That's when fans are going to say, we missed out. Not by taking the Canada job. I think right now you're already out anyways.
You know what's crazy? He's been out of work for 14 months.
Yeah, I've seen these things like, why would Jesse Marsch want to pay cut? Because you're not getting paid at the moment to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, at some point as a manager, like big-name guys can take 14 months off. Yeah. Jesse Marsch is clearly a good coach and has a resume, but 14 months, like, you're out of the limelight for a long time. Yeah. You know how that is.
All right, we have Arm in the background. He's going to join us in a couple seconds here. But Alex, I just quickly want to talk about what the 2 points from that. One, does it bother you if the next manager is American? For me, no. But the second point, I think it's interesting. Would you have any issues with Jesse Marsch maybe using this as an opportunity to grow his career, aiming for the U.S. job? And I think I've listened to that clip a few different times now, and I didn't really catch that until right now, but I feel like that would maybe rub me a little bit more the wrong way. If Jesse's going into this job with, just the pure objective, which he probably will, to do the best he possibly can, but nothing really on the US, just nothing. I want to beat the US. I want to beat Greg for no other reason than I want to beat them and help this program move on. Instead of going into it being like, I want that job. I want to use this job to be able to show them this is what you're missing out on. And that's kind of what they were talking about. And I've seen some split opinions on Jesse Marsch, just in general, over tactics, over the fact that he's American. But what are your thoughts? One, does it bug you that he's American? And two, do you think that he would use this to try to go for the US job? Or do you not think that's an issue at all? And should fans be concerned about that?
That's a loaded question.
I know. I'm sorry. I caught it there the second time when I was listening to it. I'm like, okay. So yeah. Anyways, go ahead.
Yeah. No. It's a loaded question. But I think as long as he has the right intentions, I could care less where the manager comes from. I think it's something where you just get the best manager for the job, whatever that looks like. And if you think Marsch is your person, your guy, no problem with him being American or whatever else. I think I think that's interesting though. Like, he's obviously clearly so wanted the US job. He was really pushing for it when it looked like Berhalter might be on the way out, where you wonder where his head's at. But I think what's interesting is that Marsch has that connection to Canada, that he's coached in Montreal before, and that of course a decade ago he submitted a very detailed resume, a very detailed plan to want to coach Canada and to make things he had interest. He obviously didn't get an interview. They went elsewhere, but I think it's interesting that he's also had that past experience. So I'd say no. I think he appears to have someone with the right intentions. And look, there's no problem with him using a job like this to angle for something better down the line. And I think it's natural for him to want to coach the US. He's American. The US is on the rise. I think it would be a great, whoever, like, again, this US team feels like on paper within the next 10 years, they could push to a World Cup semifinal. Like, that's not unrealistic. Whoever manager ends up being is going to look pretty darn good. Of course, if you're Marsch, why not be that guy as an American? But also, I do wonder if I think as long as Marsch for now, if it's Canada, Europe, then to the US, I think people would understand. I think as long as it's not he does his Canada job, does it a couple of years and goes straight to the US, I think that would really rub things along the wrong way. But from what we know about Marsch in his past, I don't expect him to do that.
And just to wrap up the Jesse Marsch section, if you want my opinion, one, I don't care if he's American at all. And I think the fact that he's beefing with Greg makes it even better, and it makes me want him to come here. And like Alex said, there's no reason to think that he even has his eyes on the US job. I don't know if it was in that clip, I can't even remember now, but it was definitely part of that Futbol Americas show where Herc mentioned the fact that he's basically out of the running, and US fans don't really look at Jesse Marsch as an option, really short-term or long-term for the national team. And on top of that, like Alex just mentioned, there is history of Jesse Marsch wanting this job, having ideas of taking this program to the next level. And the fact that he wanted the job back in 2012, and imagine what our program looked like all the way back in 2012. If he gets it now with the talent pool that we have, I'm sure he's thinking that I can do something pretty special here. So I don't think there's anything in there. I just saw like a lot of comments about it. I thought Herc and Seb made some pretty good points about it, but I would say, and I hope from the most part, even looking at the comments here, that no one cares. As long as he comes in with the right attitude, the right ideas, it doesn't matter if he's American. And I just think it's even funny that he's beefing with the US coach. I love it. Bring on Jesse Marsch. I think that out of the candidates we've talked about today, Alex, I know there's risk, but he's my favorite. I think, like we said, that I love that there's history back to 2012 leading to it. I know he hasn't had the most success in his last couple of jobs, but I think it's an intriguing name with some good ideas and can do something special here. And I hope we get him in before, whoever we get in before the Copa America, so they can have two major tournaments. Alex, quickly, out of all those names you saw today, who's your favorite? And then we're going to bring in Armin because he's got a question that he's been sitting on for a little bit now that he's very excited to ask. So, Alex, who's your guy?
If I'm going to pick one, no other factors, I think it's probably Marsch.
Marsch.
I think just as like a singular manager, there's enough experience, familiarity with Concacaf, familiar with these group of players, still young, brand of football. I think he ticks the most boxes because I like a lot of what the other guys have in this mix. Like a Solskjaer, for example, there's enough intriguing at his United stint where I'd be like, okay, you hire him, like, okay, I could see him giving him a shot, but also there's a lot of unknown. Did it with Clement, Karanka. They've such great assistants, but they haven't made that plunge of an assistant. You could argue, okay, well, Marsch went as a head coach and he kind of he fell, but he fell again. His lead stint wasn't really a failure. He kept the team up, like we mentioned, wasn't a fit. And even Leipzig, you could argue, has a short leash. I think he ticks the most boxes in terms of experience and all that. So if I were to pick one, I'd